Hello and welcome to the Australians Critical Insights series. I'm Damon Kickney. Hello and welcome to the Australians Critical Issues series. I'm here today with Village Roadshow's Chief Financial Officer Julie Raffe. Village Roadshow's been in an interesting spot in the market at the moment. Its profitability's improved. It's been looking at international expansion plans, and there's been more institutional interest in its share register. Julie, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Can we talk first of all, Julie, about some broader issues in the profession? As you have said, Village is part of the G100, so very much up with a lot of the issues in the profession. What would you say a couple of the biggest issues that you are dealing with in your role as a CFO at the moment?
I think in terms of reporting, we're seeing, as you know, a lot of additional legislation coming through. Well, I think our biggest issue is actually trying to sift through what we're required to report on and what is actually relevant for the investors. Talking to our investors and to the analysts, sometimes they find it difficult to find the information that they really need within the financial statements. They are so lengthy now and there's so much additional information in there. I think we are actually preparing some quite in-depth analyst and investor presentations where we hope to get the key business messages across that they perhaps might not be able to pick up quite so easily from the financial statements.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of some of the trends and legislative changes that we're seeing, not just locally but globally, integrated reporting is a big thing that a lot of people are talking about. What sort of view do you have on that framework coming through? And secondly, from an investor point of view, superannuation funds in particular, what are they demanding of corporates in terms of integrated reporting?
Integrated reporting, I think we're very supportive of. I think the concept is terrific. I think the biggest issue is actually making sure that everybody is interpreting the requirements in the same way so that you actually do get comparability. Certainly I think the non-financial data will help all investors, including the superannuation funds, to understand the business industry and in particular our own company better, and that can only be good in allowing people to understand what is actually happening within the company. But I think at the moment we don't know what the specific requirements are, and I think that it could be open to a lot of interpretation. And in the same way that we've seen dynamics around the accounting standards shift, I think there needs to be a lot more information around what does that actually require in terms of the non-financial information, and how are all investors going to be able to compare one company to another.
Now, in terms of other trends in the sector, we have seen some quite vocal comments from the corporate regulator on the issue of auditing standards in Australia, and I know it was reported a couple of months ago that ASIC had written to the accounting firms regarding that issue. As somebody who's been in the profession for a long time, what's your view on ASIC's crackdown, if that's the right term?
Look, I think ASIC obviously have a very particular role to play, and I think there's been so much noise, if you like, in the industry about perceived failures within auditing standards. I think it's always wonderful to apply hindsight. I think some things could have been better handled, but I think some things are just commercial, and I do think there's a real balance required between perhaps the ASIC letter of the law view and the commercial view that companies and auditors are required to deal with. I think, certainly the rotation of audit partners was a good thing. I think a suggestion around having to rotate audit firms is a little bit harder for companies to deal with. And I think that that's an additional cost that companies would end up having to bear, because it's always difficult to bring new audit firms up to speed with the business, and particularly if there's complexity around the business. So, look, I understand where ASIC are coming from, but I think there does need to be an understanding of the practical realities as well.
Would you say overall that the standard of auditing practice in Australia, say on the global stage is very high?
Yes, I would. I mean, I think that the standard is one of the highest in the world, and I certainly think that the auditors strive to be in that top layer. Certainly, I would not believe that the audit firms in Australia have deliberately tried to side with clients against ASIC or anyone else. So I think the standard's very good.
So turning to your company, it's been in the news a bit lately. The share price has been on the move. And talking about, I guess, transparency, there's been traditionally issues around Village Roadshow's transparency of its accounts, and there's been criticism, notably by some institutions over time. But those criticisms seem to have evaporated a bit in the last 2 years. What has the company done, I guess, to change that perception?
I think it always was a perception. I think that there's always been a fair bit of transparency. I think the issue was actually around the complexity of the corporate structure. I think at one point we had 500 something companies, partnerships, joint ventures, and that's very difficult for an analyst or an investor to get their head around that kind of corporate structure. So certainly the last few years we have done a lot of work on simplifying that. We've bought out partners or we've sold to our partners, reduced the number of territories that we're actively involved in. So by and large now most of our businesses are wholly owned, and where they're not wholly owned we provide additional information around those partnerships. So that's the work we've been doing so that the analyst can actually get to the underlying information about what's happening in our business.
So going forward, and what has been in the headlines is expansion plans that we've seen flagged in China in two fronts. One is on the theme parks side, the Hainan Island project, and also on the Village Roadshow pictures side. Right. How important is China, do you see, for the business going forward?
It's very important, as is the rest of Asia. We have said quite openly that we're looking to expand right through Asia, not just in China. China, though, is real. We have a film production business, as you've mentioned, and our first film was lucky enough to be the third largest film ever in China. I think you need to put that into perspective, though, is that we only own 47% of the company that owns that film. But, you know, it's a phenomenal first film for us in China. It gives us a lot of brownie points, if you like, in that industry. The theme parks for us is a really interesting space. So we have a partnership with R&F property developers who are listed in Hong Kong. And we're building a major theme park on Hainan Island, which will be opening in mid to late 2015. So what that does for us, it gives us some real visibility in the industry in China, which is huge. It allows us to show our expertise in building, designing and operating theme parks, and we think that will be a real introduction to other people who are looking at those kind of opportunities in Asia. So
you could see there would be other projects that would come off the back of that over the coming years?
Indeed, and in fact we have flagged that we are in final negotiations with a different developer just outside of Beijing. So hopefully, yes, absolutely. Talking
about the theme parks business and bringing it back to home then, you've got the big Sydney property that's due for opening. How is that progressing, and what are the expectations of how that will go, given Sydney has been a bit of an iffy market for theme parks if we think of Australia's Wonderland and others in the past? So why the confidence about this now?
Firstly, we're on time and on budget, so we are looking to open in early December. I would say that Wonderland wasn't quite so bad as perhaps people anticipated. Wonderland was making good money. The issue there was it was sitting on very valuable land that property developers saw as having far more value perhaps than the theme park did. But why are we confident about the Wet and Wild in Sydney? We have done extensive research. We've had enormous positive reaction to that research. There's a small water park just outside of Sydney that's doing really good numbers. We're in a great spot with a really great location in terms of people being able to get there. We're online already, and the reaction we're getting from the public's been phenomenal. So I think that park is just going to open really strongly.
Okay. Important question in terms of an event that happened in the last 6 weeks was the decision by the major shareholders to sell down their stake. Can you give us a bit more insight into why that happened and what are the benefits of it?
Mm-hmm. So we were approached by one of the big investment banks to talk about the lack of liquidity within the Village stock, and we've been aware of this for quite some time since we did the capital restructure a couple of years ago. We've really not had depth of liquidity in the market, and that hurts us. So if you look at the size of the market cap of Village, the revenues, etc., we should be sitting in the ASX 300, and that's a lot of advantages in terms of investors being on the register. So we couldn't get onto the ASX 300 because of the lack of liquidity. And so our view was that if we could get some additional liquidity into the market, that would be great. So obviously the Village Roadshow Corporation that owned 51%, we approached them and asked them if they would be interested in selling down. They did their own analysis and decided to sell down. They now hold about 44%. Now, since that happened, our share price has moved quite considerably, and a lot of investors who have said to us previously that they haven't been able to get onto our register have at least been able to get access to the stock. So I think it's been positive all round.
Julie Raffe, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.